If I was a Jets fan watching Aaron Rodgers Enigma, I'd be absolutely pissed. I'd be furious that this is how my quarterback is conducting themselves in this self-glamorizing documentary released to Netflix. And let me just kind of get this out of the way real quick. Yes, I disagree with Aaron Rodgers politically, socially, spiritually, on healthcare, how he chooses to conduct himself in the world. But he is one of the best quarterbacks to ever live. He has a rare talent that is not repeatable. He is an extremely gifted athlete, and he throws the ball like no one else. And that is not to excuse everything, but that is to say that I understand the talent. I understand the appeal. I like watching him play football, especially when he was younger, not so much the Jets version that we have right now. But what came across watching this documentary is kind of the failures that he is having on the career right now on the Jets team, because watching it, it becomes obvious that this man has never faced consequences in his life. And true that he is such an egomaniac, and he is so delusional in thinking that this movie makes him look good. This movie attempts to valorize him, and I cannot believe that's what he thinks this movie is accomplishing. This is not a portrait of a complex man. This is a portrait of a narcissist who thinks he's complex and is actually just pretty fundamentally dumb and selfish. And that's all I came across watching this movie. And again, to each their own. I am not here to police somebody for what they think or believe in, even if I disagree. We can have fundamental disagreements and still get along and still appreciate you for what you do. The issue while watching this movie and this documentary specifically is I don't think Aaron Rodgers can. And specifically, I think this is now leading into his professional career. It's become so much of a nuisance, and so much of how he acts ends up coming across on the football field, and it makes his game just way worse to watch. It's a bizarre thing. To put it simply, Aaron Rodgers comes across as the most insecure jackass in the world, and a legitimate crazy person a lot of times in Aaron Rodgers Enigma. And it's incredibly fun to watch, but it's fun to watch in the car crash type of way. Like you see a compilation of just horrible stuff on YouTube and you can't take your eyes off it. That's what the Aaron Rodgers Netflix documentary is. My takeaway watching it is Aaron Rodgers is this guy that just wants to be oppressed so badly. Aaron Rodgers wants to be a victim, and he's triggered when people call him out for his antics and behavior. Guess what? A lot of athletes are not vaccinated, and that's a huge point in this documentary is his vaccination status. They don't feel the need to lie about it to reporters. They don't feel the need to fight this battle or die on this hill or really just become this polarizing figure in sports. It's just he puts it on himself, and he's almost trying to make himself a martyr for a cause. But again, you're not particularly original for doing this. A lot of athletes do it, and you're now just kind of a distraction more than you are anything. And there's a lot of things that he does in that movie that I feel like this. And the Aaron Rodgers documentary, it follows him in 3 parts. It really follows his career. We get the beginning, we get the middle, and we get this Jets chapter. So we start with him becoming the prospect, him under Brett Favre as the backup QB, Brett Favre retiring, Aaron Rodgers getting to the Super Bowl, winning the Super Bowl at a young age, him now having the expectations put on the world and him underperforming, the struggles with Green Bay, and then the final chapter where he moves over to the Jets with some of the controversies that take over in the 2020s. And along the way, we are also seeing this spiritual journey that he is on, which includes a lot of psychedelics. Here's the thing. Guess what? Reporting true stuff that you did and partook in is not a witch hunt, as he would like you to believe watching this movie. Guess what? Rushing back from your Achilles injury post the doctors telling you that's probably not a good idea, and it ends up looking like it's hurt your career. Well, here we are. I mean, this is kind of this case of watching it, and it's why I found this documentary in some ways fascinating, is watching this guy who's quite literally ignoring every medical advice that he's getting. And it's not fully like he's committing to the recovery. He is doing all that. And yet they're like, hey, you need to like be realistic with this. Like you going out, you rushing this could make the situation worse. And he doesn't really listen, but in some ways he does because the season ends. There's so much about it where this documentary is such a one side from Aaron Rodgers and not a reality. Like, for instance, there's this whole push about post Aaron Rodgers coming back from his Achilles injury. He'll be back just in time for the Jets playoff season. Listen, I watched Zach Wilson throw last year for the New York Jets. I went to the New York Jets versus Patriots game. I believe it was week 3. Zach Wilson was a terrible quarterback. And the fact that they won, I think, 7 games last year is an incredible miracle given how bad Zach Wilson was at that starting QB position. There was never going to be a postseason for them. And this whole time, there was this narrative of, oh, Aaron Rodgers is going to be back if they could just tread water and get to the playoffs. Like, that wasn't really a realistic expectation. This documentary doesn't show that. There's this whole belief that like, oh, it's going to happen. Like it's going to happen. He's ramping up. It was a distraction more than it was anything. It was very clear in the way that it was discussed with fans, how they were talking about it. They knew there wasn't a postseason happening. Some might have been delusional enough in believing it and wanting to buy into that hope, but they knew this probably wasn't going to happen. But it's this narcissistic personality to stay in the news, make yourself the center of attention, which is something that Aaron Rodgers does in this movie. He is essentially the only one fighting, and you found a handful of people who are also narcissists who carry water for you. That is what Aaron Rodgers Enigma is. It is a lot of people giving lip service to Aaron Rodgers, speaking of his greatness, and he's trying to essentially rewrite this narrative that he's written himself. What he's so self-absorbed on is he doesn't realize that this movie is in many ways enforcing the narrative that he himself is the one responsible for. He likes to blame this on everyone else. This is not based on anyone else. This is based on the actions that you have chosen, that you have performed, that you have put yourself out of. Again, other athletes have similar political beliefs, healthcare beliefs, other social beliefs, cultural beliefs, whatever it may be, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't affect them, but it affects you. Why are you the only one who's really getting affected by this day to day? Despite, even in this documentary, it shows a lot of his teammates seem to be sympathetic of what he believes. And no one's ever at times telling him like, hey, you can't believe that, or hey, you can't do that. It's just the fact of how he chooses to do it. It's the actions. It's somebody who is spending their career and the way that they present themselves to put the attention on themselves. It's such a self-interested look at Aaron Rodgers. And again, this is my own bias. I don't like the actions which he does and which he almost celebrates in this documentary. This is a guy kind of gloating with what he's getting away with and like defying the status quo, as he's kind of puts it. I'll say it again in this review. I hate it. I think it's stupid that he intentionally misled people about his vaccination status. He doesn't have to believe in vaccinations. That's his choice. That's his right as an American. I don't agree with that, but that is fundamentally his choice. And there's consequences that can come with that. But again, a lot of athletes didn't believe in vaccinations. This is this whole thing of, oh, you were the only one. You were the only one daring to ask questions. A lot of people ask questions about this. I think it's stupid that he was essentially spent a news cycle being like, oh, is he going to be RFK Jr.'s VP? Like, again, this is another distraction. It's hubris, but it's this thing where Aaron Rodgers is like, maybe I would make a great VP. Like, I have to really consider this offer. Like, it's, again, kind of just showing how full of himself he is. I think going on national TV and making up claims about another celebrity being a pedophile is just stupid and dangerous and just should be like, he should be called out for it. Like, yeah, you have the freedom to say whatever the fuck you want. Like, that is totally in your right. freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. And that's the thing that kind of drives me crazy. Like, yeah, I find it disgusting that he shares in government conspiracy theories on Sandy Hook, like that he's reposting or like really encouraging people to be free thinking about this. Like, yeah, I find that stuff morally disgusting. But again, to each their own. He can think whatever the hell he wants. I don't really care what he thinks. It's the way of which he then has to tell everybody what he thinks. And again, I get it. I'm doing it too. I am on this channel. I am talking about what I believe in, but I'm also not a public figure like he is, and I'm not doing this in any way. And two, I don't then go on and be like, oh, well, people are mad about my opinions on this or this. Like, people are so mad about it. Like, no, I open myself up to criticism, and if I need to own up to some of my criticisms, then I do. Like, that's the difference, and he's incapable of it. Everyone else has to be wrong. He has to be right. And you get that characteristic very early on in Aaron Rodgers' Enigma. You are defined by your character, and he lets his character speak for himself. And notice, I didn't say, I think he was stupid for not getting vaccinated. I never said that. I didn't say he's stupid for supporting RFK. I don't care if he wants to head to South America and take psychedelics as a form of medication and meditation. I don't think he's a jerk, per se, just because I disagree with him on most, if not all, of his takes. We are separate people capable of having our own beliefs. I can think he is all of these things. I can think that he's stupid, and you can think that I'm stupid. Who cares? Like, that is really the whole point of it. But this is how he chooses to conduct himself. And then he makes a Netflix documentary to kind of reinforce this is how he acts. And it's really funny. Like, it's legitimately really funny to just see him complain about all this and saying that there's an agenda against him. People who call him out become... He labels that as a witch hunt, saying all this crazy stuff, like the whole immunization scandal that happened, I believe, in 2020. Him essentially being asked by a reporter, hey, are you immunized? And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, obviously it gets found out that he's not. And then he's like, well, reporters didn't ask a follow-up question for clarification. They didn't care about that. It's like, yeah, because they asked you, are you immunized? And you said yes. Like, what's the follow-up question? Like, there's no follow-up question to give there. Like, that's about as straightforward of a question that you can get and as straightforward of an answer. Hey, are you immunized? Yes. Okay. It's this whole narrative and belief in himself that he has to fight back from all this. But as he describes it, it's heartbreaking. Like, oh, my reputation took a hit. Yeah. And in this documentary, you talk about it, how like you got with your publicist and you lied about it and you knew it was a lie. And you were like, okay, this will eventually come out. We're going to eventually have to fight it. Like, you had a game plan for this, knowing that you were lying. He has this belief that he has to fight back from all this. And he could have just said, no, I'm not vaccinated and I'm not planning to become vaccinated. And I hope you all respect my decision as I respect yours if you decide to be vaccinated. Here's the truth. I love sports. I don't know the vaccination status of De'Aaron Fox, of Buster Posey, of Brandon Crawford, of George Kittle, of Brock Purdy, of Fred Warner, of Nick Bosa. Might have an idea on Nick Bosa, but I don't know it, nor do I care. Like, I don't really care about all of this. A lot of athletes aren't vaccinated. They don't feel the need to make a Netflix documentary where that is a good chunk portion of your documentary. It's like, it's kind of insane that he does that. And the fact is, this documentary, Aaron Rodgers Enigma, could actually be good. Aaron Rodgers has a great story to tell. This is a kid from a small town in Northern California who joins his high school team, becomes a very talented QB at a young age, leads his local community college team to instant success, and then becomes the most beloved quarterback in Green Bay's Packers history, as well as a 4-time regular season MVP, a Super Bowl MVP, and then leaves and suffers a devastating injury to a franchise that has never known happiness. There is a lot of emotional drama to tell in this story. There is a psychology of an injury that only he can explain. There is a drive to return, what it's like to fall in the draft. And he conveys some of those feelings in this. Like, there's a very compelling part. I find Aaron Rodgers like weirdly captivating, despite, again, me having disagreements in him. Like, I find him a very charismatic human being. Like, I get the appeal of him. And he is like really smart about football. Like, this is clearly a guy who has studied, who has learned the game of football, and has put a lot of thought into how he approaches the game, the offshoots within the game, the psychology of the draft, what that means to him. Like, there's a lot of that in there. What it's like to be drafted to a team that has a beloved franchise QB, knowing you are his replacement, and how that then feels 15 years later when you find yourself now the guy being replaced, when they now draft the young quarterback in Jordan Love, and you realize, oh, I'm now in the situation that I was once, the young guy. Like, that's a fascinating part of this documentary when it explores it. It just chooses not to explore it as much in favor of his vaccination status and his choice to do psychedelic drugs. And, there's a part of it where he's talking about it, imparting wisdom onto Jordan Love, something Brett Favre couldn't do for Rodgers. Like, there is an emotionally compelling aspect of that. What it's like going to a franchise like the New York Jets, having the hopes of a desperate fan base on you, and then for everything to go wrong, coming back from this Achilles. Like, again, the episode 1 is pretty compelling because it is him trying to recover, and the psyche and drive needed to recover from an injury like an Achilles at his age of 40 plus. Like, that's a pretty interesting story in it. And then meanwhile, as you're trying to recover, you're watching Zach Wilson commit terrorism on the football field. Like, losing faith in an organized religion is an aspect of the Aaron Rodgers story that's compelling in this movie, and why he turns to spirituality and medications or / meditation, that he goes and he's taking these psychedelic drugs in the South America. Like, there's so much here. And there's this family estrangement element in here with his brother going on The Bachelor. Like, that's touched on, but again, not really focused in any large part. You don't really understand the rift that he's feeling that he describes in it. Like, one of the interesting aspects of this documentary is him breaking down what it's like to be a quarterback playing during COVID and there's no crowd, and how that quietness helped him focus and really allowed him to have a kind of second spurt in his career where he's able to win an MVP again during that, and being a leader in a locker room, being a leader of men, what it's like being in the middle of a media frenzy / scrutiny, as he understands very well. We've seen documentaries about hundreds of athletes with crazy opinions. We all love Dennis Rodman. We all love Mike Tyson. Yet with Rodgers, he instead chooses to make a documentary which often focuses on the least interesting parts of his life. And all of these controversies are part of the story. There's no denying it. And I think it is good to address them and talk about them and allow the audience to kind of just understand him in that way. So I'm not necessarily degrading the movie on portraying these. It's the fact that he's making this almost as his case for himself, not as a, hey, this is who I am. I have complexity. Like, that's not what this is. This is, hey, I'm the smartest guy in the room, and you're all just kind of idiots if you don't think that. Like, all documentaries are at least in part a vanity project, but especially when it's your team making it. And sometimes these documentaries can be bad. Last year we had Steph Curry Underrated, which I thought was quite bad, but then we also have ones that can be great, like The Last Dance. Last Dance obviously had Michael Jordan's participation, but it also had other key historical figures and teammates and competitors there to essentially serve as a check and balance. And in that, it allows you to have a better understanding and complex understanding of an individual, of a team as a time and moment, not just a figurehead talking about everything that he's done. And Enigma just doesn't care about any of that. And what he doesn't realize is, again, he thinks that this documentary, he's setting the record straight as a free thinker. What he's unaware of is this is legitimately one of the funniest sports docs you will ever see. And it's especially funny timing considering the fact that the Jets just suck this year. And Rodgers has been, quite frankly, a bad quarterback. He does not move well post his Achilles injury. This is the rise and fall of a man. And it ends up being the portrait of a guy who's constantly being told he is great. And he doesn't understand that this is essentially the hubris. This is a crashing down. I think he thinks this was going to be something of a celebration of his career. This is almost going to be a study of, oh, this is where it's all going wrong. And you can tell pretty right away of how he chooses to portray himself. In the first 90 seconds of this documentary, he's going to a tattoo artist who makes a dragging eat in itself. It's an infinity loop. And again, he's like describing it like, oh, this just like came to me, even though that's like a very popular design, and like using dragons and snakes is like common. So like the fact that he's using a dragon just isn't like that original. Like, again, and you can get whatever tattoo you like, but the way he's portraying it is just very stuck up and just like, this isn't that original as you think it is. And there's this moment in it where in this first 90 seconds, this tattoo artist is doing it. He doesn't know who Aaron Rodgers is, but he looked it up and he quite literally says, oh, this is one of the most, he says this is the most famous quarterback. Like, that's a line within like the first minute of this film. And there's a few moments of that throughout these film, and these are quotes given to the camera. There's a registered pharmacist at a charity golf game who comes up to him and thanks Roger for his COVID anti-vax stance in chapter 3. Like, this is the stuff we're talking about in this movie. So ultimately, like, it's a pretty funny documentary. I had a blast watching this for 3 hours. I found it just an insane rise and fall of somebody so incompetent, not realizing that's actually what he's making, and how absurd this is given the situation that he is currently in. And as a Niners fan, I delighted to see Aaron Rodgers constantly lose to his childhood team. Like, there's a lot of funniness in there. This is an egocentric personality. You've seen it before. This one is a unique approach to it just because of how checked out the subject matter is and how out of touch he is with a reality that he believes is. And guess what? I know there's going to be people who defend him. He is a great quarterback, and you cannot take away what he did in his career. He is a wonderful athlete. He's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen in my life. There is so much gift, there's so much talent, and there's so much genuine about Aaron Rodgers. I just find it absurd that he's lost the plot of it and has now decided that he'd more be interested in the cultural wars aspect of it and not the, hey, let this be a celebration of your career, which you've had one of the best. Aaron Rodgers Enigma, you can check it out on Netflix now. 2 out of 5 stars, and that's being a little generous, and that's just because I enjoyed myself for 3 hours, even though I know that the conceit of this documentary to portray Aaron Rodgers in a positive light, to essentially be a celebration of him, isn't how this comes across. And in that way, it doesn't communicate. But as a documentary capturing something, I found it quite fascinating. So that's my review. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more.